Okay. Well, I think we can start. What I'll do is I'll start. This is a session about typography, handwriting, and school. What I'll do is I will play a short video first, and then the idea is to have a discussion, a conversation about this, what I think is a very important topic. So I'll play the file now. I hope this works, and if there's any problems, please let me know in the chat.
Fellow typographers, we are well aware that we are in the midst of a revolution. For the first time in history, everyone is able to use typography directly. But the implications of this event have gone largely unnoticed. It appears to me, for example, that the education system is not aware of this typographic revolution. Otherwise, there would be typography classes at school. Typography in the 21st century is part of basic literacy. Literacy, after all, can be defined as competence with a script. In the digital age, this means competence with the digital scripts. In other words, digital typography. How can we raise awareness of this powerful shift? And how do we instill sensitivity for typography? In this talk, I will try to look at this problem from a different point of view. In 2014, I moved to China, and without realizing it, at the age of 38, had become illiterate again. Learning to write Chinese characters late in life was a conscious process, a real eye-opener that gave me a fresh insight into my own native script, the Roman alphabet. China is embracing technology faster than the West. But China will always give writing by hand a central place in education. Why? Because Chinese are very aware that using our hands to write creates an intimate connection with the written word. There is one central idea shining through education in China. Learning to write by hand is also learning to read. Because in the West we think of handwriting as something outdated, it has become an activity of minor importance. And now, increasingly, typing is replacing handwriting, whereas in the West, we are still considering handwriting as a means of creating text. The Chinese education is based on a different paradigm. The Chinese are looking at handwriting from a different point of view. Handwriting is fundamental to learn to read and become familiar with the script. Reading, handwriting, and typing are connected. There is increasing scientific evidence supporting the fact. Research shows that using our hands to write helps the visual perception of letters. This phenomenon is called multisensory integration. The images of letters created in the brain are formed by sight as well as touch or proprioception. Our senses are connected because writing and reading are deeply related skills. In China, only one kind of handwriting is taught at school: regular script. Regular handwriting looks like the characters that are found in books. In other words, writing regular script by hand and typing regular script on a computer has similar appearance. Regular script is not cursive. It is slow to write, but was designed for optimal reading. The creative exercise of writing using the hand helps the perception of characters found in books. The West stopped using regular handwriting more than 500 years ago, at the time of the appearance of a new disruptive technology, the typographic press. Typographic designs were inspired in handwritten forms. Nowadays, as every child knows, the letters we learn to write by hand at school do not look like those we find in books and on screens. From all the letter forms that have been used in the West, the fact is that nowadays there are mainly two scripts that we use and that we need to be familiar with: regular script and italic script. By mastering these scripts at school, children would not only learn to write, but also to read and understand typography. Currently, handwriting models, even those called print, are cursive, and none of them consider letters as two-dimensional shapes. Children are asked to copy a typographic model with a pencil. And by repeating this impossible exercise, children are learning not to see. Or, if you want, they are learning to disregard form. Some 100 years ago, Edward Johnston was already suggesting the use of a broad pen in schools for its educational value. Jan Tschichold wrote, "By practicing formal writing, the typesetter will understand the shape of typography better. Real knowledge is only gained by diligent practice. Theoretical considerations are totally useless." More than 50 years ago, Jan Tschicholds' advice was aimed at people who work with and use type. But nowadays, don't all of us use typography to write on a daily basis? Nearer to our time, the story of Steve Jobs, who made beautiful typography available on personal computers, provides another example. Jobs dropped out of university and took a course in formal writing. Reed College had at the time perhaps the best calligraphy course in the States. Robert Palladino was his teacher, and Jobs was fascinated by the handwriting classes. He found them artistically subtle in a way that science couldn't capture. He was very aware that none of this had even a hope of any practical application in his life. But later, when he was designing the first Macintosh computers, he said, "It all came back to me, and we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography." The link between visual education, formal writing, and calligraphy is evident. Like learning to ride a bicycle, learning to understand the shape of letters requires not only theoretical knowledge, but embodied and practical experience. In the words of David Kindersley, knowledge and experience must go hand in hand if any understanding is to be achieved. Or, as the calligrapher Wang Yangming put it, knowing is the beginning of action. Action is the fulfillment of knowing. Since literacy is defined as competence with a script, and the scripts we use the most are regular and italic, it is evident that whether we handwrite or type, education will benefit from focusing on these two scripts. We have created a platform called Hand to Type and are starting pilot projects to train teachers and work with schools. We want to build a community of typographers, designers, and publishers to join forces and bring typographic education to the classroom.
It was a very satisfying experience for me. What a unique experience.
We advocate a global paradigm shift that gives typography a place in education and uses formal handwriting as a fundamental technique to learn to read and discover the subtle but powerful craft of good typography. A final thought. We often think of writing as a technique to record words. True, the written word lasts longer than the spoken word, at least until the arrival of YouTube. But there is another, more profound difference between speech and writing. By bringing spoken sounds onto visual space, text allows to be analyzed in new ways by the eye. The eyes can sense things that the ear can't, allowing us to see things from a new perspective. The invention of writing systems is followed by the study of grammar and logic. Written text raises our consciousness of verbal language. In the era of YouTube, literacy, reading and writing are still the foundation of the school system. Although typing is becoming popular at school, it's just one kind of technology to produce text, and this does not mean that typing will help children to understand our writing system better. To illustrate this, you can ask yourself this question: is using voice to input text real writing? The answer is, it depends. It depends on the familiarity we have with what we are actually doing. Digital technology has certainly made writing easier, but it has also disengaged us from the written word. Google may already predict short email replies, but it is for us to give this reply a meaning. Are we preparing students for this kind of world? Why do these questions matter so much? Because technology has empowered all of us to become publishers. A blog can reach more people than any publisher could have ever dreamt 20 years ago. Publishers were gatekeepers of content and form. Today, the responsibility of content and form has been passed on to all of us. I hope to see a world in which the written word flourishes. I personally believe that a new strongly embodied approach to literacy will help us to experience what it means to be human. Let's help the new generations relate to our great technology of writing directly. Let's make handwriting interesting, creative, and enjoyable again. In an age where machines can do all the writing for us. As Edward Johnston put it, our aim should be, I think, to make letters live.
Hi, everybody. I think that Agatha tells us that we're moving to the ATypI Hangout space. But since everybody's here, we've got 34 people with us. I just want to take a few minutes, Christian, to just unpack some of the amazing things that you said. You've left us with a major challenge about what it means to be human, and asking for a new approach to literacy. Just a small task for a morning, or an afternoon or an evening over here. And I just want to unpack some of the things that you said, because they're really major philosophical points about how we approach typography, how we approach language. You spoke quite a bit about the multisensorial integration of the word and language, but also importantly, you connected it to empowerment as publishers. So not just those of us that have the privilege of having, access to things, but people who perhaps might feel empowered differently with a different approach to literacy. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to this, to unpack it? I'm sure that people have questions and they're pouring in. So can we be naughty for a few minutes and handle questions here before we have to go to the ATypI Hangout room, if that's okay with everybody? So if you could just talk a little bit about your journey and your thinking, unpack the presentation a little bit, because you made some big points there, and then I'm happy to read out the questions a little bit to take things further. And if everybody would join us with questions in the chat, I'm happy to read them out to Christian. So Christian, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think it's about empowerment. It's also, I think there's a danger hiding behind all this. And I think this idea of more literacy in a world that is exploding of what is in fact publishing and written media. I'm talking about Twitter, Facebook, and all these things. I think if we have to make sense of it, we have to make people more aware of how this works, how this medium works. And as for me, well, I started thinking about these things when I saw how handwriting was taught in China, which is this thing that I explained in the video, that what is actually taught is regular script, which is slow to write. It's not as efficient as cursive script, but it's much better if we're actually learning to read, or let's say what handwriting does in the modern age, I think, is it's not just produce text, because I mean that's been taken over by typography now, and that's what I think is that learning to write Chinese characters made me look at how the Roman script works and how we're actually teaching it at school. So that's how I came up with these kind of ideas. But I think the talk is based on three very simple premises, which I think we can all agree. Which is that, first of all, everybody has become a typographer today, because everybody's working with type directly. And that's something relatively new. It's something that's been happening for the last 20 years, let's say. So that's premise number one. Number two, that literacy is competence with a script. And in the digital age, that would mean digital scripts. And premise number three, which is connected to number two, is that we don't have typographic education at school nowadays. Mm-hmm. So I think the challenge here is how do we raise awareness about this issue, which I think all of us will agree is terribly important. And yeah, so I would like to make a case for a better way of teaching handwriting that would be based in teaching regular script and italic script, which are the two major scripts that we use in the West. And by using this embodied cognition, I think we would understand typography better and make reading better as well. So it's about visual education.
So there's something here. I think there's a couple of questions. So I'm going to use the questions to unpack a bit. I think start with Brody, who says, how can I help? And I think everybody's sort of excited about the cause that you're pulling us towards and a role that we can play as typographers or designers in a really primary sense in terms of education and literacy, which are quite different things. I'm going to start with Sam's question, though. It says, how can non-calligraphers amongst us best support our young children if they aren't even getting much focus on handwriting at school? Mm-hmm. So what would your thoughts be about that?
Well, the idea is to start developing products for this. I've been doing some experiments with brush writing, for example. Anything which is similar to a broad pen or a broad brush, I think is very educational. And it's the tools, it's exposing the children to these tools. And as Edward Johnson said, it's the tools themselves that do the teaching, in fact. So it's terribly important. Typography is very subtle in many ways. So the simple statement, it's the broad pen that matters. It's something that a calligrapher, it's the tools that matter. It's something that the calligrapher will understand perfectly well. But for I think the public in general, perhaps it's, a pencil or a broad brush or a broad pen does pretty much the same job. And of course it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to complicate that question a little bit with Ishan's question. It says, what does literacy mean in a world like today? Is it knowing the internet and the English language? Because Ishan is based in India, and he says, I see rural Indians managing basic English skills and knowledge of WhatsApp and Instagram to communicate. So we have social platforms. I think it connects back to what you talk about, a visual education in relation to literacy. And also your own experience of learning, how to write Mandarin in Chinese letter form. So can you tell us a little bit about what does literacy mean in a world like today? Given the context of many people have different, what we see as literacy. What is the broad scope of what you see as literacy?
Well, I do believe, and that's why I think typography really is at the center of all this, that the best definition of literacy that I came across is competence with a script. In the digital age, that would be competence with the digital script. That means digital typography. So I think this is the easiest way to express it. And I think the best way to connect with typography is, in fact, formal writing.
So you said that there was a two-dimensional letter, isn't it? You spoke about us kind of. So how does that, what does the two-dimensional letter mean when you're saying competence with a digital script?
Well, then I think we're going to very funny territory, because that letters are two-dimensional things is very clear to someone who works with type or a calligrapher. And I kind of use the same words, express the same idea with someone who's kind of not technical, and the meaning of those words would be different, because it's changing that form, that shape, that makes everything that is interesting about calligraphy, and so the study of form is what is interesting here, and for that, I think to not just be able to understand the words, but the implications of this. I think it's very important to have a background in formal writing. That's exactly where the discussion starts. It doesn't start with a theoretical discussion. It's an action.
So it's the experience. It's the experience that's embodying the letter. So which goes to your point about. So you see then competence with a script as being a multisensory competence with typography.
Correct.
Is that
Especially
right?
hand, touch, proprioception, which is like the inner feeling, muscles, all this, right?
So the most expensive thing for us in the world right now, to go to Brody's point, is time. We're all very time poor. We're all sort of working from home at weird hours. And I have no idea where people are from on the chat, but I'm guessing it's not morning for everybody. It's probably good afternoon or late evening. So Brody's point is that teachers have no time or energy to commit to yet another subject in the classroom, and they don't have time to retrain. Very similar for parents. So how do we enable this? How do we enable this change that the call that you're asking us to make? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's by stating that this, I believe, is the most important issue that we're facing. All the problems we're having with social media and all these things. What we're discussing here really is the most basic aspects of literacy in the digital world. I really believe that. I don't see how this can be less important than anything else that is being done at schools nowadays.
Okay, that's quite a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
So Sam's comment back is also that we commit time to reading at home. So I feel the same about that. I have a 8-year-old where reading is a big focus. You connected reading and writing together. That writing can help us read. That writing can help our literacy. But Sam says writing is something that I don't do especially well, and I don't have the confidence to do properly with my children. So what does well mean? What does writing well mean to you?
Well, exactly. I think that's another good point. And very often when one is talking about formal writing, people start thinking, well, it's about beautiful letters and things like that. You know, it's too difficult. I cannot do it. This kind of thing. I think what means well is as good as oneself can do it. I mean, there's no level that needs to be reached. It's just the way one explores written language. I think what is important is and just to go back to, I think there was a question about how can I help? So someone had asked that, and I think the idea of this talk, in fact, is to try to create a network of people. I mean, if you're interested in doing some trials, I mean, please, by all means, drop me an email, and I can share about the things that I've been doing, the experiences that I've had, also with giving talks at teachers, schools, etc., etc. But I think the idea is to create this network, and I'd be very happy to be like a hub for this.
So what email address do we get you on? I've got a question about that already. How do we get in touch with you, Christian?
I just put it on the
chat. Okay. So I suppose what you're saying here is about an enjoyment as well. When you're saying not writing well, is also just to perhaps enjoy the process. You're saying the exploration, the experimentation, the connection with the letter as you're drawing. So I guess here's a question for you about your writing. Did this help you writing in a different language and in a different script? Did that you hinted about it a little bit, that it brought back a new understanding for you about writing and literacy, that it brought back a new enjoyment for you as well about language?
I think it was the enjoyment. I think it was the problem with literacy is that we become literate when we're quite young. So I think the process is very unconscious. And what happened to me when I went to China was that the process of starting to from scratch again, and was very conscious. Was a very, very conscious process. So it got me thinking about many things. And just to give you one example, the way Chinese is taught, the starting point is the teaching of 8 basic strokes, which then are articulated to make all the other characters. Now, one could start the teaching of a Western script exactly in the same way. So I think it was, yeah, starting again from scratch, very sort of when I was in my 30s, gave me a totally different insight into what was going on in this process of writing and also reading at the same time, or at least learning to see.
For me, it's a slightly different experience. So when I grew up in India, as a very young child, before I learned to read, I was reading visually because of all of the kind of Bollywood posters and the billboards. To see letters come to life with kind of color and form. So for me, the visual and the textual are really bound up. And I could see a point that Sahar's making, but also I think Ishan is making about the visuality of the letter form, really. And it goes back to your thing about the multisensory, that letters, and us being human. After all, language and conversation is about the senses. It is about touch. It's about the orality. And perhaps we forget those aspects of typography and the importance of that as a kind of embodied experience alongside what you call the kind of theoretical knowledge as well. We're getting little nudges because we're totally misbehaving. We should really be in the hangout room, and I've ignored all of that because you said something about knowing is the beginning of action, and action is the fulfillment of knowledge. You mentioned that. Right. What does that mean for you? Perhaps we can unpack that in terms of the cause, in terms of what you're telling us, in terms of a multi-script world, in terms of empowering people who are perhaps don't have the privilege of literacy but need to be empowered as humans. What does that mean? How does that translate? And what does that action mean? And what does that knowledge mean for you in an ideal world?
The meaning is, of course, learning by doing, and not learning through words or an explanation, but it's through the experience. And it's very funny that you have this this quote that you just mentioned from a Chinese calligrapher, and you have basically the same thing from this quote of David Kindersley, saying that for any understanding to be achieved, knowledge and I think it was something like knowledge and action need to go hand in hand. Well, I don't have the quote with me now, but it's basically the same concept: knowledge and experience. I think he says in his quote. Yeah. So it's basically the idea is learning by doing, not learning by a long explanation with words, but by actually making those words.
I think you're also connecting us very nicely in your call for this idea of a new approach to literacy of change through making as well. I think that the place of kind of the creative arts and design education in creating quite a massive kind of, towards a global challenge, human rights, empowerment, freedom of voice. So I just want to say thank you very much for giving us a great start to the morning for some of us, or a great start to the afternoon. It would be wonderful if we could all head to the ATypI 2020 hangout space that's on our agenda, because there are colleagues there who I'm sure would really like to hear more. And it's a bit more of a kind of informal atmosphere where you could pitch in to ask questions as well. So thank you to everybody who attended, but thank you very much, Christian, for giving us a big ask to start us off in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rathna.
Thank you. Thank you. See you there.
Yeah.
Bye.